Hey everyone, AOC did not like Marco Rubio's Munich speech.
Marco Rubio's speech was a pure appeal to Western culture.
I'm Rich Lowry of National Review, and that was AOC pouring scorn on Marco Rubio's Munich speech because it emphasized Western culture. Why would she consider it a problem that a statesman of a major Western country would emphasize Western culture? And why would she put sneer quotes around Western culture as though it's something that doesn't exist? The fact is that elements of the left are deeply uncomfortable with our own civilization and culture. And when you understand this, you get more insight to some of the foundational issues underlying political debate in this country. So let's dive in. What's the West? Basically, Western and Central Europe, the English-speaking world, Latin America, basically Western, although you can argue it should be its own subcategory. That's what Samuel Huntington, the case Samuel Huntington, the great late social scientist, makes. We don't need to get into that now. What characterizes the West? Individualism, separation of church and state, representative government, rule of law, property rights. So what's not to like? Well, let's stick with AOC for our critiques of Western culture. One line of attack is that it's all built on hypocrisy.
When you have a rules-based order where you carve out exceptions to our values, exceptions to our rules, eventually the exceptions become the rules. And I think that, to your original point, over the last 5 years, we've seen such a breaking and such a fraying of these alleged Western values that people wonder if it ever existed in the first place.
Alleged Western values. So this goes to the classic mistake where if someone is hypocritical or doesn't live up to their own values, you say, oh, the values themselves are a lie and don't exist, when that is completely untrue. Now, in terms of Western civilization, our values oftentimes were incompletely realized. We saw this with the slow development and spread of rights over time, with the end of slavery over time, or there have been Western countries that have hideously violated Western values. Obviously, Germany, Italy in the 1930s, in World War II. But this doesn't mean the values are wrong or the values aren't there. To demonstrate the real world effect of these values, let's look at the Cato and Fraser Institute report on human freedom. They put out this ranking annually on how countries are doing in terms of protecting human freedom. And let's look at the top 15 countries from the 2025 report. We have Switzerland, Denmark, New Zealand, Ireland, Luxembourg, Estonia, Finland, the Czech Republic, the Netherlands, Australia, Iceland, Canada, Sweden, Taiwan, the United States. Now, you can quibble with these rankings. I don't know whether every single one is exactly right, but we can assume it's in the ballpark. And what's most notable about that list? All Western countries with the exception of Taiwan, which is significantly Westernized. Now let's look at the other end of the list, the least free countries in the world. Okay, here are our cellar dwellers: Somalia, Russia, Nicaragua, Chad, Ethiopia, Libya, Algeria, Burundi, Venezuela, Egypt, Myanmar, Sudan, Yemen, Iran, Syria. What's notable about that list of countries? Every single one, with the exception of Nicaragua, is a non-Western country. And as noted earlier, you can argue about whether Latin America is truly part of the West or not, whether it's its own subcategory. So a related critique of the West, I'm not sure AOC made this directly herself in her response to Marco Rubio at Munich, is that it's wrong and offensive to suggest that we are the best civilization. Well, let's look at another list of countries, because I think if you are free and prosperous, you're doing a pretty good job, right? You're doing a really good job for your people and for your own interests. So let's look at the most prosperous countries in the world and the least prosperous countries in the world. So this is a list of top countries in terms of per capita GDP. We got Luxembourg, Switzerland, Ireland, Singapore, Iceland, United States, Norway, Macau, Qatar, Denmark, Netherlands, Australia, San Marino, Sweden, Germany, Belgium, Finland, Canada, etc. Again, I imagine there's some different methodologies here. You can quibble about certain places, but the big picture is correct. And what's notable about it, once again, well, we have some countries that are very small where a lot of rich people live, or places with a lot of mineral resources. Otherwise, all Western countries. So here we go with the worst: Burundi, South Sudan, Malawi, Yemen, Central African Republic, Madagascar, Sudan, Mozambique, Congo, Niger, Somalia, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Nigeria, Mali, etc., etc. All non-Western countries. So the West is doing pretty well and has been for a very long time. But here's another point from AOC.
Marco Rubio's speech was a pure appeal to Western culture. You know, I think it's also important to note how thin that foundation is. Culture is changing. Culture always changed. Culture for the entire history of human civilization has been a fluid, evolving thing that is a response to the conditions that we live in.
Thin? Cultures are thin? This is so juvenile and wrong. It's the complete opposite. Now, of course, cultures do change over time. That's a truism, but cultures are deep and thick. What are the roots of Western civilization and Western culture? Ancient Greece, ancient Rome, Western Christianity, the Enlightenment, the scientific and industrial revolutions. These are huge factors going back hundreds and hundreds of years. So culture is very deep. It's also very thick. What is a key constituent part of culture? It's religion. In the West, it's the Judeo-Christian inheritance. What runs deeper than that? Also, language is so important. It's the way we express ourselves, and some of the most profound human experiences get their expression through language. Again, that runs extremely deep. And if you don't want to think the West is enduring, well, let's look at some of the rival cultures that someone like AOC, I guess, is more friendly towards. Russian culture. You look at Russian history going back hundreds and hundreds of years. It doesn't matter what the government is. Doesn't matter what the regime is, who's in power. There are certain defining characteristics of Russia that are there no matter what. The same thing is true of China. And both of these, by the way, are fundamentally illiberal political cultures. So what does AOC think is more fundamental, by the way, than culture and Western culture?
They want to take this mantle of culture. At the end of the day, though, it is very thin.
This is such a juvenile and Marxian way of thinking. We saw a strong version of this in 1914 at the outset of World War I, where communists and socialists and peace activists thought, oh, all the working classes of the combatant or soon-to-be combatant countries, they're going to unite together and oppose the war, when the opposite was the case. They all supported their own nations because those bonds of national identity and culture were so much stronger than the supposed economic bonds across borders. So this is a childish materialism. The working person in the United States basically has nothing in common with the working person in China, even with the working person in France. Now, all this said, it's worth remembering when we're considering the perversity of all of what AOC is saying here, that we are talking about NATO. NATO is a Western alliance that was founded to protect Western countries from a perverse, by the way, Western ideology, ultimately, Marxism refracted through an alien and hostile culture and civilization in Russia. Of course, the West should be proud of its civilization and intensely, highly committed to defending it no matter what AOC says. I'm Rich Lowry, over and out.